This past week marked the celebration of Earth Day. And while I have not always turned aside from the lectionary in order to preach an Earth Day themed sermon, I'm starting to reconsider that. Because what could be more important than our stewardship of the precious gift of God's creation? Earth Day is an opportunity for us to emphasize on one day in particular the sort of creation care that we are called to each day of our lives, but that we too often overlook. Now, there are a zillion places that we might begin to reflect upon the concept of creation care, but for whatever reason, my mind turned this week to an old, much beloved, but more recently much criticized children's book, The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. The book was published in 1964, the year of my birth and 7 years before the first Earth Day was celebrated. It begins, "Once there was a tree." And it tells the story of that tree and of a boy who loved to climb the tree, eat her apples, swing from her branches, and play in her shade. It is an idyllic, perhaps even Edenic beginning place. The boy loves the tree loves the boy, and she offers simple gifts of sweet fruit and restful shade, while the boy offers in return his love and his affection. But time goes by, and the boy's visits to the tree become less frequent. One day he finally returns, and the tree offers what she has always offered: fruit to enjoy, branches to climb, shade to rest in. But the boy replies, "I am too big to climb and play. I want to buy things and have fun. I need money. Do you have any money?" Having none, the tree offers what she has. "Take my apples and sell them. Then you will have money, and then you can be happy." And so the boy does. And again, he's away a long time, but then he returns. And the tree offers the same invitation: enjoy, climb, rest. But the boy, now no longer a boy, replies, "I'm too busy for those things. I need a house so that I can have a place for shelter and for family. Can you give me a house?" And of course the tree cannot. But she offers the boy that the boy may take her branches and use them to build a house so that he can be happy. And so he does. But here we may note with caution, already the tree has less to give. A tree with no branches no longer has the capacity to bear fruit. So the tree still gives, but the tree is growing depleted. Now, in predictable fashion, the boy/man is gone for a long time again. His modus operandi is that he returns only when the tree is of use to him. This time, when he returns, the tree's invitation is diminished. She cannot offer fruit to enjoy or even branches to climb in, yet still she offers herself. "Come, boy, come and play." "I'm too old and sad to play," says the boy. "I want to build a boat and sail away from here. Can you give me a boat?" "Cut down my trunk and build a boat," says the tree. "Then you can sail away and be happy." Now again we note, the more the tree gives, the more consumptive the boy becomes, and the more depleted the tree becomes. But none of his consumption ultimately brings the happiness that he seeks. At last, he returns once more, and the tree has nothing left to give, just an old, weathered stump to sit on. But the boy/man, now grown old and weathered himself, has no energy for the broader pursuits of life anymore. Now he is content to simply sit on the stump that once was a tree and rest. And as the book concludes, the tree is, after a fashion, happy. She is at last back with her boy, but the cost to her has been great indeed. Now, as I say, the book has been much loved and much criticized. Some see the tree's steadfast, giving, unquestioning acceptance of the boy as gentle and generous and lovely. Others have suggested that instead of the giving tree, the book might better be titled The Tree Without Boundaries, or The Codependent Tree. As described by Wikipedia, many codependents place a too low priority on their own needs while becoming excessively occupied with the needs of others. So you can see where that description of the book arises. As such, these critics say that the tree's behavior is unhealthy, not exemplary. But for those familiar with Shel Silverstein's work, which often had a dark or satirical or slightly skewed edge to it, it's possible that rather than the tree being the hero of the book at all, instead the boy is depicted as an anti-hero, defined by Wikipedia as a main character in a story who lacks the conventional hero qualities such as idealism, or courage, or generosity, or morality. In other words, more so than pointing at the tree and saying, do this, the book may be equally pointed at the boy and saying, don't do this. Such a reading is suggested by a comment Silverstein once made about his own book. It's a book about a boy and a tree. It has a pretty sad ending. A pretty sad ending because the boy loses his early connection with the tree. He begins to see the tree purely as a commodity to be pursued, to be consumed in pursuit of his whims and his comforts, rather than as a relationship to be cherished. And in his taking and taking and taking, he only too late finds any sense of happiness or contentment. And maybe as he sits on what little remains of the tree, he at last discovers the wherewithal to reflect on what he has lost and on what he has cost. In that reading, the book becomes something of a cautionary tale. In the words of Joni Mitchell's song, Big Yellow Taxi, don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? Now that's a lot of time spent analyzing a children's book. But the upshot is this. When the boy stops seeing the tree as something precious to be enjoyed and cared for, and he begins to see it as existing instead to serve him and to fulfill his needs and his desires, the tree is stripped of the ability to bear fruit, to offer branches to climb, even to offer shade. Only a stump remains. The boy literally consumes the tree. We might pause there and to say that such is often the case with humanity and with our relationship to the earth. We burn rainforests to clear land for cattle to graze. We strip mine mountains in pursuit of coal. We overfish the oceans and hunt animals to extinction. And even those of us whose environmental sins are not quite so egregious as that make daily choices that have environmental costs. Few of us live as simply as we might. But the purpose of a sermon is not to scold, but to remind, to inspire, to explore God's will for our lives. So let's take a moment and seek to explore a simple theology of earth care. Now, the best place to begin that exploration, I suggest, is with the opening verses of Psalm 24. The earth is the Lord's, and all that is in it, the world and those who live in it. In other words, we own nothing. We are entitled to nothing. We are temporary residents passing through, and that of itself should remind us that we should not casually consume what we do not own. The entirety of creation is the handiwork of God. It belongs to God. It is precious to God. It is therefore, and I do not use the term lightly, it is therefore holy, sacred, to be treated with awe and with reverence. We should take off our shoes because we are standing on holy ground wherever we stand. But there's another thing hidden away in these early verses of Psalm 24. The earth is the Lord's and all that is in it, the world and those who live in it. Hidden away in that verse is the truth that we are not separate from the rest of creation. In fact, the verse does not say the earth is the Lord's and all that is in it, the world and those humans who live in it. We are no more and no less citizens of God's creation than any other living being. All of creation belongs equally to God. All of creation is beloved by God. And we need to get over our idea that we are God's favorite or God's only children. We have siblings, if you will. We are in relation to the rest of creation. And if we are in relation to the creation, shouldn't we undertake the effort to know it, to love it? Not just to pass through it or to exist in the midst of it, but to observe it, to conserve it, to preserve it. Father Zosima, the spiritual teacher in Dostoevsky's novel The Brothers Karamazov, describes our interconnectedness with the creation in this way. All is like an ocean. All flows and connects. Touch it in one place, and it echoes at the other end of the world. Love all of God's creation, both the whole of it and every grain of sand. Love every leaf, every ray of God's light. Love animals, love plants, love each thing. If you love each thing, you will perceive the mystery of God in things. One of the saddest aspects of our modern existence is that we have become increasingly separated from the land or the creation. We spend much of our time inside. In fact, with the advent of heating and air conditioning, we spend our time inside and with the doors and windows closed. We live inside our homes, and when we leave them, we walk to our cars and drive them to our workplaces where we sit inside, and then we get back in our cars and drive back to our homes and go inside and turn on our TVs. And that, of course, is an exaggerated caricature of our existence. But too few of us, myself certainly included, spend extended, intentional time in nature. And here's the shame in that. To know God's handiwork is to know something of God. To commune with God's creation is to commune, in a way, with God. In the church nursery, when I was growing up, there was an old record player, and one of the records was a recording of old hymns. And on that record was my first favorite hymn. This is My Father's World, first written as a poem in 1901 by Maltby Babcock. This is my Father's world, and to my listening ears all nature sings, and round me rings the music of the spheres. This is my Father's world, I rest me in the thought of rocks and trees, of skies and seas, his hand the wonders wrought. This is my Father's world, the birds their carols raise, the morning light, the lily white declare their Maker's praise. This is my Father's world, he shines in all that's fair. In the rustling grass I hear him pass, he speaks to me everywhere. This is my Father's world. Oh, let me ne'er forget that though the wrong seems oft so strong, God is the ruler yet. This is my Father's world. Why should my heart be sad? The Lord is king. Let the heavens ring. God reigns. Let earth be glad. Now, what I loved about the hymn, even at the earliest age, was the sense of intimacy with God. In the rustling grass, I hear God pass. God speaks to me everywhere. What then if I never hear the grass rustle? But as we're reflecting on a theology of creation care, our role is more than simply to contemplate nature, to appreciate the beauty of God's creation, or to acknowledge that the earth belongs to God. Another aspect of such a theology is captured by Psalm 8, our second scripture lesson. Here, the psalmist wonders in awe at the magnitude and the majesty of God's creation. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you are mindful of them, or mortals that you care for them? Yet you have made them a little lower than God and crowned them with glory and honor. You've given them dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under their feet. Now, at first glance, this might seem to contradict what I said earlier, that we must stop considering ourselves as God's favorite children. Clearly, the psalmist indicates in Psalm 8 that we humans are special, but we're special not in quality, but in role. That is to say, we're not more inherently valuable than a fox or a bumblebee or a red-eyed vireo, but we've been given special authority or special responsibility in relation to the rest of God's creation. We are given dominion or oversight or stewardship of all that is. We are called to be the chief conservators and not the chief consumers of the earth. God does not love us better any more than a parent has more love for an older child who is placed in authority over her siblings. Rather, the parent grants special authority, not special privilege, to the child most capable of exercising oversight in order that all of the children that the parent loves may be safe and well and cared for. That means that we are called to a special and particular role in creation care. But as I alluded earlier, the creation is not thriving under our care. A prime example is our incautious use of plastic. The first fully synthetic plastic was introduced in 1907. Fully synthetic meaning that it contains not one molecule found in nature. Since that time, plastic has come to infiltrate every aspect of our existence, greatly simplifying and greatly improving our lives in many, many ways. But because it does not contain any molecules found in nature, it cannot decompose or return to its constituent elements in the way that something naturally occurring can. As a result, it is ever with us. It can be reformed or repurposed or reused or recycled, but the plastic bottle that we casually throw away has to go somewhere. One website I found indicates that over 300 million tons of plastic are produced every year, of which an estimated 8 million tons per year end up in the world's oceans. Plastic has been detected on the shorelines of all the world's continents, in the stomachs of marine animals, and in the stomachs of seabirds, making especially poignant the line from Psalm 8, "You have put all things under their feet," or authority, "the birds of the air and the fish of the sea, and whatever passes along the paths of the sea." Rather than thriving under our care, they're suffering under the weight of our choices and our actions. In addition to our overconsumption and misuse of plastics, we have refused to acknowledge or to mitigate our contribution to global warming. Global warming is considered an undeniable scientific reality, yet science deniers continue to refuse to acknowledge that it's a problem or that we humans contribute in any meaningful way to it. As a result, we find ourselves more committed to our way of life than our care of creation, which has disastrous effects upon the creation itself. Even when we do acknowledge global warming, we tend to think of its impact upon us rather than entire species becoming extinct. A very short-sighted view when we consider that we also are a species. Earth care and environmental care must begin somewhere, and a truly biblical view indicates it must begin with us as humans, and specifically it must begin with the wealthy and powerful nations of the earth, and that means that it must begin with us. Yet so far it has tended to be, by and large, business as usual for our country. In fact, many argue that there's no point in our making sacrifices for the environment if more populous countries like India and China or large swaths of the developing world will not. Why should it cost us more? Why should it inconvenience us? Such conversations have fueled our pulling out of the Paris Climate Accords as an example. Evangelical pastor and environmental activist Richard Cizik responded to such objections during a 2007 Sunday forum at the National Cathedral. First, if the U.S., as the most prosperous nation in the world, won't lead the way, who will? And second, if Christians won't help lead this country in its environmental concern, who will? In the end, he said, God isn't going to ask us whether China or India did their part, but did you do yours? As people of faith, creation care is a God-given imperative. It begins with our recognition that we are a part of a complex and beautiful web of life in which we have no special value, but instead special responsibility. We're called to cherish God's creation, to see it as God's marvelous handiwork and our caretaker's charge. In a way, it can all be summed up in the story of a single tree, the giving tree with which we began. Because the boy loved her not for what she was, but simply for what he could take from her. In the end, there was no tree for his children to enjoy. Cautionary tale indeed. So the question for us, with all that God's creation offers us, is what shall we give back? Amen.